Good afternoon to you all, and welcome to our program today. First of all, I would like to express my apologies. We had some technical problems. For those who are on Facebook, we did put out a message out, but finally we are here and everything has been sorted out, and that has been beyond our control. But I'm excited that we are here and we are going to have an exciting time. I'm your host today on behalf of ZiMMA UK, which is an association of ministers with a Zimbabwean heritage who are ministering in the UK. And I'm Hartness Samishonga. I am the secretary of that association, and I will be the convener today. And I do have an exciting panel that I have with me today. But before I get on to that, let me tell you a little bit about ZiMMA. I'm just going to take an opportunity to tell you a little bit about the association. We recently launched this association as a network association for, as I said before, ministers with Zimbabwean heritage who are ministering in the UK. And the main objective behind that is obviously to maintain the networks, but also to create a professional body that supports and promotes ministry, professionalism within ministry itself, development of ministers, but also to engage our local communities more effectively. So that's what we exist to do as ZiMMA. And what we have decided to do is once in a while, we have some webinars which focus on subjects that are pertinent to our, both obviously Christian community, but also our African community. So that is why we are here today talking on a very, very exciting topic, which I would say is a real hot topic, particularly in contemporary theological discussions. Now, some of you will know that in the last few decades, we have seen a lot of people moving from the global south to the global north. And as a result, a lot of African initiated churches or African majority churches have actually come about here in the UK, also in Europe, in America. It's generally the global north. And obviously what that does, it does have an effect on missions. It does have an effect on church, how we do church. So this is the reason why we are here, because there's quite a lot of churches or ministries that are operating in the UK that were actually initiated by people from Africa, but also with African majority congregants. And that really deserves some attention. Now, for those of you who are either interested in theology or you follow theology, you can almost see that in the last, I would say, decade, these discussions have really escalated because it has become a real place for focus, not necessarily within the African community, but within the wider theological community. And I want to assure you that today is going to be really exciting. I do have an exciting panel. So first of all, I'm going to put all of them on the screen for a moment, and I'm going to introduce them individually just for you to know who we have. And yeah, let's just have all of them on the screen, and then I will take time to introduce them one by one. Thank you. Right, okay. So that's our panel there. I do have people that are really knowledgeable in the area, and I'm going to introduce I'm going to start with Dr. Sunday, Dr. Nometa Sunday. I'll give you his profile in a moment, but could I just say that Dr. Nometa Sunday is also part of the ZiMMA leadership. He is one of the committee members for ZiMMA. And as we spotlight him, I'm going to read his profile to you and then just give him 2 or 3 minutes just to tell us who he is. So as we spotlight him now, I'm going to read his profile. Nometa Sunday holds a diploma of philosophy, Doctor of Philosophy in Religion and Social Transformation from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. He is a pastor by calling and a theologian by training. He likes to describe himself as an African practical theologian. He's a former academic dean of Living Waters Theological Seminary in Zimbabwe, which is the AFM Church Theological School. He has published 18 scholarly articles and book chapters in accredited academic journals. He's an adjunct lecturer at the Zimbabwean Open University. His research areas include, but not limited to, disability studies, theology, missions, gender, and diaspora studies. Currently, he's a research fellow at the College of Human Science Research Institute for Theology and Religion at the University of South Africa. He's also a senior pastor of Apostolic Faith Mission International Ministries in the UK. Welcome, Dr. Sunday. You're not new to ZiMMA, you are part of ZiMMA, but I want to welcome you today for being part of the panel. And actually, Dr. Sunday and I, we have also published on diaspora theology or missiology. Last year, we did publish 2 papers. We did some quite intensive research on a large UK Pentecostal, which actually was started by people who migrated from Zimbabwe. So he is appropriate to be here today. And thank you for accepting the invitation to be part of the panel, Dr. Sunday. Just tell us who Dr. Sunday is in the next 2-3 minutes before we get ready to introduce Dr. Kuyani. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your interesting, kind words that you have spoken. It's very good. I'm very passionate about theology and how the church, especially the church in Africa, is responding or making missions in the United Kingdom. And I'm so happy to be part of this discourse that is real new and emerging in the global north. Thank you so much for such a warm welcome that you have given me. Thank you, Pastor Agnes.
Right. The next panelist I'm going to introduce, a very good friend of mine, Dr. Kuyani. We're going to spotlight him as I read his bio. Thank you. Harvey Kuyani is a Malawian mission theologian currently based in Liverpool, England, where he teaches theology at Liverpool Hope University, while also providing executive leadership at Missio Africanus, a mission training initiative that he founded in 2014. He has authored several books, including Sent Forth, African Missionary Work in the West, Multicultural Kingdom, Ethnic Diversity, Mission and the Church, and Our Children Need Roots and Wings, plus many peer-reviewed journal articles. He lives with the excitement that we are witnessing the rise of a younger generation of African Christians ready to touch the world for Christ. He hopes to help develop the resources for however God wants to use Africa to reach the world. So welcome, Harvey. I call him Harvey, Dr. Kuyani. We give you your title today. And I'm really excited to have you here. He has great wealth of experience in this subject. I think it's going to be very apparent as we start delving into these discussions. And welcome, Harvey. And I want to give you just 2-3 minutes just to tell us a little bit about you so that my audience will get connected with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I do really think that you have said everything that needs to be said. And so let me use this time just to congratulate you guys, the formation of ZiMMA UK. I think that's a very significant step in the establishment of African Christianity in Europe. I do think that it's going to make some things easier that we could not do before. So I'm really excited. I look forward to seeing you develop. I look forward to seeing bits of research coming out of your work. This is exciting. So congratulations. We cheer you on. I'll be on the sidelines clapping hands as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harvey. It's good to have you, as I've said. Next, I'm going to spotlight and introduce one of our panelists, Israel Olofinjana. I'm going to spotlight and then just say a bit about him. Israel Oluwole Olofinjana is a newly appointed director of the One People Commission of the Evangelical Alliance in the UK. He's an ordained and accredited Baptist minister and the senior pastor of Woolwich Cathedral Baptist Church, a multi-ethnic, multi-cultural inner city church in the southeast of London. He previously pastored Crofton Park Baptist Church between 2007 and 2011, and Catford Community Church, 2011 to 2013. He is the founding director of a Center for Missions for the Majority World, a mission network initiative that provides cross-cultural training to reverse missionaries in Britain. Israel is also an honorary research fellow at Queen's Foundation for the Theological Ecumenical Education in Birmingham, on the advisory group of race and theology of society for the study of theology. He's also an executive team of Lausanne, Europe, advising them on matters related to diaspora ministries in Europe. He's a member of the Spade-Jones College Academic Quality Advisory Committee. He's on the Christian Aid Steering Group of Black Majority Church Leaders, exploring the intersection of climate justice and racial justice. He is a Yoruba, but is obviously Nigerian, coming from a Pentecostal background. He holds a BA honors in religious studies from the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and a Master of Theology from Carolina University of Theology. Israel has written several books, including editing this particular book, World Christianity in Western Europe, Diasporic Identity, Narratives and Missiology in 2020. African Voices, another book towards African British theology, turning the tables on mission stories of Christians from the global South in the UK in 2013, and then co-edited Encountering London Baptist in the 21st Century in 2015. He's the author of Reverse Ministry and Mission Africans in the Dark Continent of Europe. 20 Pentecostal pioneering in Nigeria, and Partnership in Mission, a Black Majority Church Perspective on Missions and Church Unity, that's 2015. He is happily married to Lucy Olofinjana, who is the Senior Media and Communications Officer for Churches Together in England. They are based in with one son, whose name is Uyanulowa, meaning God's miracle. So I'm really excited to have you here, Israel. You know, when I started my journey as theologian, my main focus is not necessarily African theology, but when I started to delve into African theology, I would see your name almost everywhere. So I've quoted you in quite a number of publications, and it's actually good. We had a very good conversation on Thursday evening, and I'm really excited to your contribution today, the contribution you've made, not just in the UK, but around the world in this subject. So we are really excited to have you here, and thank you for coming. I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes. I just welcome the audience, and if you want to say something either about you, what you're doing, what you're excited about, then we can kick off our conversations, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Hartness. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be among esteemed colleagues. And, you know, Dr. Sandy, Dr. Harvey, is a privilege to be here among these wonderful colleagues. I think you've said a lot of stuff about myself, and I suppose 3 things really. One is that I'm a church leader, and I've led multi-ethnic, multicultural churches. My experience is that I've never led a Nigerian church. So that's the first thing about me. The second is I'm a mission person, and you know, not just talking about it or not just writing about it, but actually doing it, from church planting to cross-cultural mission work to youth missions. I've been involved at it various levels, working with mission organizations as consultant at various levels. So I've been involved in various aspects of mission, from climate justice to reverse mission, diaspora mission. It's so mission, I like mission, I talk mission, I live mission. And then the last thing is, as a researcher, focusing on African theology, African theology shapes everything that I write or research. But my approach has always been interdisciplinary, looking at African theology, whether in relation to world Christianity or in relation to diaspora studies, Pentecostal studies. So it's always been that connection with other disciplines, reflecting on them and looking at Black majority churches in particular in the UK, so reflecting on African churches as well as African Caribbean churches. So that has been the sum of my work in terms of research. But those three areas has been the areas I've been working on: church leadership, missional leadership, and as a theologian, African theologian, writing and researching in that area. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you guys, for being able to tell us a little bit about you. And I mean, I know you guys, and as a fellow theologian, I know exactly what you stand for. It was just an opportunity for the audience to get to know you a little bit before we get into the issues. So the title of our discussion today is African Diaspora Churches in the UK, the Opportunities and the Challenges. And I'm going to throw this question right straight to Israel. Can you please tell us what is reverse mission? What does that mean? It's a term that we hear, it's a term that's being thrown about. Could you just tell us what reverse mission stands for in this context? What does it mean when we talk of reverse mission? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hartness. I think there are different ways one can conceptualize reverse mission. And I think a question I've been asking myself of recent is reverse mission, is it a phenomenon or is it a movement of the spirit? I'll come back to that question. Mission, some have said, is reverse colonization, because some have asked the question that if Africans are leading African churches in the UK, it seems to me that we are reversing colonization. We are trying to colonize Europeans into our churches. So some have said reverse mission is reverse colonization in that sense. But I think that's that's very harsh, because I think the problem is categorizing reverse mission in the same way as European mission movement to Africa, where mission was done from above, in the sense that when European missions went to Africa, they went with power, they went with prestige, they went with mission societies, they went with churches praying and supporting and funding, and they went from a culture that is seen as superior. So you're going to do missions to the pagans, to the heathens. The first set of African theologians had to wrestle with contextualizing and decolonizing those kind of terms. But using those kind of thinking to talk about reverse mission as reverse colonization, even though I understand the perception and what is being talked about, that if a Ghanaian is leading a Ghanaian church, that's not reversing anything, is it? In that sense, I think, to me, reverse mission captures something of a heart of gratitude, in the sense that it's simply saying, yes, European missions went to Africa, and some of us were saved through that. So, for example, the founder of Redeemed Christian Church of God, one of the big Pentecostal churches from Nigeria, in the person of Pa Akindayomi, started his spiritual journey with CMS in Nigeria, and then later went on to found RCCG. And today, there's a lot of RCCG in the UK, more than 800 parishes across the UK. And so when you look at that story, it illustrates the transnational and the dynamics of reverse mission, of mission flowing from here to Nigeria, and then now it's flowed back in that sense. So in a summary, that is sort of what reverse mission is. And I can trace my own spiritual formation back to that process as well. The pastor under whose ministry I got saved in Nigeria can trace his spiritual formation to an English missionary who went to Nigeria in 1937 in the name of S.G. Elton, who a lot of people regard as the grandfather of Nigerian Pentecostalism. He died in Nigeria in 1987, and he influenced a lot of the Pentecostal preachers that we talk about today in the Nigerian context. And so I can trace my own roots back to there. And then when I came in 2004, I was sent to plant a Nigerian church in the UK in that sense. So that is what reverse mission is. But the term has got its problems. It's not without, I mean, that's the thing when you're talking theological context, there will always be problems with any term that you use, because reverse mission presumes that mission is, original mission is European and reversing it is African, which demeans it and makes it look inferior. But the other side of reverse mission is that I think it brings a post-colonial rhetoric and edge to mission, stating clearly that those of us who used to be regarded as people from younger churches or non-Christian world have matured to an extent that we are now sending missionaries. Mission senders are now coming from those places. I mean, it's a total different picture from the conference that happened in 1910 in Edinburgh, where they were talking about mission going to Africa, Asia, and other places. Now we talk about the highest number of concentration of Christians being in Africa. So that changes the game. And it is from that flow that people are now coming either as refugees or either as economic migrants or either as asylum seekers. But I will add a fourth point. There are also missionary migrants. And I think that's where some of us in this Zoom call fall into. We are missionary migrants. We are people that have moved by the Spirit. So is it a phenomenon or is it a movement of the Spirit? I think it's more than a phenomenon now, because to say it's a phenomenon means it's a once occurrence, and that's it. But I think it's a movement of the Spirit, because people are coming, whether they come as a refugee and they pick up God's call at Heathrow Airport, immediately sensing, like one of my pastors would tell me, immediately I landed at Heathrow Airport, I just felt a sense that God was calling me in that sense. So there is that call. Or when you hear of a cleaner, an African cleaner who is cleaning homes in Switzerland, in somewhere in Belgium, who is ministering to a family and talking to them about Jesus. And these are people who have come as, other types of migrants, but they are doing mission. So reverse mission is couched in those sort of language. As I said, sometimes it's problematic, but I think it's still saying something positive about mission. So that's just a definition to start us thinking in that sense. I can say more, but to allow other people to share, I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much, Harvey. I'm going to throw this right to you, okay? I know you've written and published on this. I want you to tell us really, if an African group of people come to the UK, set up a church, and it's predominantly African, is that really reverse mission? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations with Israel. I fall on the other side of that discourse. I do not like the term reverse before mission. So I generally speak in broader terms of mission. And I think the main problem for me with reverse mission is that I don't really think that, I mean, when the movement begins with the first church in Acts 2, right? And we know that in Acts 2 there are, Luke mentions at least 15 nationalities, so to speak, in Jerusalem at that time. I do believe that the strategy was for Jesus was to get this group of Galilean Christians, Galilean disciples who would follow Christ, get them down to Jerusalem, let them meet the diaspora, and begin to move and conceptualize the movement from from northern Galilee, where these guys had come from. I mean, Peter's accent gives him away that he's a Galilean, right? Get them down to Jerusalem, meet with the wider Jews from Luke says, from every nation on earth, at least the way they understand it at that point in time. But the goal was always to reach the uttermost parts of the earth. So the goal right from the beginning was to reach every tribe, every nation, every tongue. And how that happens then is the shift from a Hebraic Jewish church to begin to incorporate Gentiles to a point where the Gentiles take over and becomes more Gentiles than the Jewish church. And as it moves from culture to culture, from nation to nation, it's employing it's integrating new ways of thinking about Christ, new ways of thinking about mission. And I do think that continues until today, that God's mission is always moving forward, that it doesn't reverse, it doesn't go back. What God did in Africa with the European missionaries in the 1800s, 1900s, what we are doing now is just moving that conversation, that way forward, that whether it's a British person moving to Nigeria or a Nigerian coming to Britain, God's mission is always moving forward. We're still going towards the end goal, which is disciples of Christ in every tribe, every nation, every tongue. So that's my thinking on reverse mission. I do think that then Christians who have come from Africa to Europe, ought to think of themselves, and many do, as people serving in God's mission, right? That their presence here is part of God's mission in Europe, and that most people do. What becomes a challenge is how do we then contextualize our works and our ministries to be able to cross the barriers so that mission that God has brought us to Europe for does not end up being limited by just reaching fellow Nigerians or fellow Zimbabweans or fellow Malawians or fellow South Africans. That God's mission given to us is to the world, is to our neighbors. And here in the UK, very good example, our neighbors could be Polish, could be Russian, could be Australian, could be Brazilian. And how do we shape our ministries, our works as a whole, to be able to pass on this gift that God has given to us today to our neighbors, wherever they come from? And that's the tricky part. So when we reach out and build these churches that are made up of people who come from our own countries, I mean, there is a need for the faith to continue. Those churches serve a purpose. They help us sort of figure out how life works in Britain, but also they can be the limiting factor to our sense, to our calling for mission. That once we become identified as a Zimbabwean church, it becomes difficult to break that label to become known as a multinational, multicultural church, right? And that's the challenge that we have to wrestle with. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Harvey. I just want to go a little bit deeper with that conversation, because I want to go into the practicalities. I mean, it's one thing to have desires and plans. I just want to go into look at the practicalities of that. And I'm going to throw this to Dr. Sunday. Can you tell me how easy or difficult is it to actually, as an African originating church, to then become a church that reaches out and ministers to people of all nations, actually within the United. I mean, we're living in UK. It's a multi-racial, multi-ethnic community, and I do understand the argument that we need to break out. So, maybe from your experience, from your understanding, how easy or how difficult is it?
Thank you, Pastor Hartness. It's a very profound question that you have thrown in there. I want to look myself in trying to answer this question from the level of a theologian who is learning on the lines and cheering the praxis of the church. So as I'm putting on the lenses of a theologian who is looking, is a linesman and looking at the religious expression that is happening in the church or the praxis. I think the fault line that I begin to see from the research and observation and experience is the formation of the church. Because we are coming from a monocultural society and just being dropped into a multicultural society. So even though we are mission oriented, but the context that we're just being dropped into, it becomes a snare to most of us. So the easier thing in that drop is to look for ethnicities, to look for identity, is to look for support, and is trying to gather together. And that becomes a very, very big challenge that I've seen ourselves, especially, my experience. Those churches which are not really sending missionaries per se to establish churches within a certain context, often forget the context, the culture that where they are being situated. And so it becomes a regathering of certain identities and certain praxis of worship and expressions, which really becomes a barrier to penetrating the local context, which is the essence of missions. So if we are just serving ourselves and perhaps also losing the second generation in the context, I think the challenges of serving missionary work is inevitable. So I think most of the struggle is the intersection of our theology, our expression within a multicultural church. Because as migrant, the church is already missional in its own context, in African context. But what nature does it take within a multicultural context? I think that has been a hindrance. And once the formation is hinged on issues of identity, issues of helping and supporting one another, it doesn't go further than that. The challenge is likely to be decline or closing of those churches, because all those things will wither with time and they'll be lost. So my worry is how then, having been drawn or pushed into the context of the diaspora, how then do we contextualize who we are, so that it doesn't help that the church is 40 years, but it's just ethnic. It's not serving its purpose as a missional church, because the diasporian, it becomes the field, a new field that this church has been thrown into. So I think I would just want to emphasize the formation, what forms the church, so that we begin to build from there. I think I'll rest my case on that one for now.
Thank you. I'll tell you what I like about what you said. You mentioned that for most of the immigrants who are coming, particularly from Africa, they're coming from a mono-ethnic perspective, where living in a place where you have people with multi-ethnicity, for most people, I would say, it's actually something new. And you do highlight that as one of the challenges that then makes it a big challenge to actually break out and begin to minister in a way that is actually multicultural. And just leading on to that, I'm going to go to Israel, because Israel, my understanding is you're part of a multicultural church, a multi-ethnicity church. And what would you tell ministers who are out there who are asking questions of how did that come to be? Is it an anointing? Is it a strategy? What did you do? What are you doing to be able to do that, either yourself or the group of people that you minister with?
Thank you very much, Pastor Hartness. I think we can't have an African conversation without talking about the anointing. So we have to at some point. So I like that. I think let me start by saying intentionality is very important, because as I mentioned in the introduction, when I came from Nigeria, I had an opportunity to gather existing church members from our church in Nigeria and start a Nigerian church. And on reflection, if I have done that, I'll probably be leading a mega church today. I'm very confident of that. But as I reflect and I start observing a lot of African churches in Southeast London, I started visiting these churches, and I was observing everything they were doing. I was impressed with some of the things they were doing, but it just suddenly struck me that oftentimes it's Nigerians leading Nigerians and Ghanaians leading Ghanaians and all that. And there's a reason for that, which is a conversation I think we still need to have. There are some reasons for that. But I just felt God was calling me to something different. I felt if I've come out this way from Nigeria, it would be a shame to come and lead a Nigerian church. I might as well just stay in Nigeria and just continue with my Nigerian family church. So I decided I wasn't going to be doing that. I wanted to be in a multi-ethnic context. And that's how I migrated and found myself within the Baptist setup, putting myself in an English church. And I started learning the dynamics of what it means to be all nations, what it means to function in different nationalities, cultures, social background. And I think one thing I would say is this: so intentionality is very key, that we have to be intentional in not just only in our thinking, but in our action. So it's not just thinking it, but it's putting it into practice. And I think the other things that follows from there is as you begin to think strategically and act, the other things that we need to begin to look at is leading or developing a multicultural church is hard work. It is hard work. I've led at least more than one now. So I know the headaches and the heartaches that comes from that. And I think when I talk to a lot of pastors, sometimes they don't want that hard work. People just want quick fixes. People want to lead mega churches, successful churches. And one way people feel they can achieve that is lead people that look like you, that understand your language, that shares your culture, your customs. They know where you're coming from, what theologians will refer to as homogeneous unit principle. People replicate that quite easily. Leading a multicultural church, you have to be prepared that it is hard work. And constantly, every week, I can tell you, there is always something to think about. There is always something to wrestle with. There is always something to nuance and to understand. You have to think about your audience, who are the people in your congregation, who are the people you want to attract in your congregation. You have to think about the demography of the area where your church is located. You have to think about your leadership, who is on your leadership, who is missing. How do you teach? How do you encourage leaders from other culture to be under leadership? There are various things, and we haven't even talked about worship. We haven't talked about safeguarding issues, the different views about safeguarding, women in leadership. All these things constitute some of the headaches in a multicultural church, which is why at times people avoid it altogether. And like that is only for few people. But I think when we understand the biblical mandate, that biblical Christianity is essentially a multi-ethnic Christianity based on revelations and other texts in Antioch that we've talked about. I think when you understand that vision, then we must seek, even though it's difficult, we must seek to see how we can do it. But I would say intentionality, hard work. Then I think Dr. Sandy mentioned contextualization. I think there is the need for a kind of an education of our pastors and church leaders, because at times I worry that the church planting strategies that many have employed or are replicating, I won't call them church planting, I will call them church extension practices. And church extension practices is based on, we have few church members who have traveled over here. Let's gather them together, let's start a church. And that is what I was supposed to do. And I rebelled and said I wasn't doing that. But that's what a lot of people do. You know, I've studied this. A lot of the African pastors that came in the 70s and 80s, that is what they did, essentially. Gather existing members who are frustrated with the British culture and the coldness towards Christianity, to say, let's do this. So I understand some of that frustration. But I think if we are going to be thinking about intercultural church plants, and then developing and growing that, it is hard work. And we have to look for partners that we can work together, that we can trust, and go on that journey. And then other thing we need to think about is the kind of language that we use in the church. You know, many of us, we are Africans, and, you know, you want to attract white folks into our church, but you want them to call you bishop all the time. How's that going to work? You know, we come from a culture of respect where we love our titles. I have had to learn that painfully when I was doing youth work in our first church. Some of these young boys and girls, they were calling me by my name, and I had to swallow my pride as a Nigerian, that this young boy that, you know, you think, that's a small boy, small girl calling me name, just like that. In my culture, that would be very, very rude. You have to swallow those pride to forget, okay, they don't have to call you bishop. They don't have to call you apostle. And so we have to be relational. If we are not relational and accessible, it will be difficult for people from other culture to come in. The other thing to think about is language. You know, if we are using Shona in our services, if we are using Yoruba, if we are using Swahili in our services, that already cuts out a whole lot of Africans already, not let alone African Caribbean, and then let alone European. So we have to think about some of these practicalities to see how we can work them out. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to multicultural church, but hard work, intentionality are key aspect to think about.
Thank you very much, Israel. Obviously, your response is based on two things there. I know you've researched extensively on that, but also you bring real life experience of a minister who migrated from Nigeria, now ministering in the UK, and you are actually speaking from a place of experience, and nothing really beats experience. I'm going to go to my friend Harvey. Harvey, I know you work with churches, trying to help them break those barriers. But before we do that, can you just explain to us what you've been finding in as far as the barriers in regards to moving for church? I mean, I speak to a lot of ministers. Some are okay just being a monoculture. They believe that that's what God has called them to. They are serving a specific group of people. And to some extent, I understand it. But the challenge comes when we talk about the second generation, which I don't want to talk about now, because that's one of the things we're going to go into, which has lots of insights. I think is going to be very helpful, not only to the ministers, but also to the younger generation of congregants who are within the African diaspora churches. So Harvey, what I need to understand from you, what I want us to share with us is your experiences of African immigrant churches in the UK. I know you actually worked in the US as well. And you've done some work in Europe. Just give us a picture of what had been the challenges in as far as reaching the local people. I know you do have lots of experiences. And then just after that, tell us how ministers can be helped in trying to cross those boundaries. Thank you.
You can hear me now. Yeah, so this is a journey that I've been on for quite some time, spent a few years in Europe, crossed over, came to the UK, lived in the UK for a few years, moved to the US, did some work in the US, planted a church in the US, and then left that church, came back to the UK. And so that is to say, over the past 20 years or so, I have worked quite with a fair number of African churches in Europe and North America. Now, as Israel was saying, leading a multicultural church is difficult. But I want to extend that to say, actually, this whole work of pastoring a church in a foreign culture is not easy, right? That the African pastor in the UK, in Germany, or in the US does the work of many people all in one. He's an immigration lawyer, he's the counselor, he's all this. He's doing quite a lot of work. And the challenge with that is, plus, of course, with our African culture of deferring power and authority to leadership, they have to do that. But the problem that comes out is there will be a lot of burnout in the ministry. We do see that apart from a few, many people will be in the ministry for a few years and then leave, go do other things, because it's just a lot of work. It's taxing. I've seen so many African pastors who've ended up in hospitals because, of course, they are doing too much work. We need to learn to adjust into a new culture. I mean, to an extent, it works in Africa because you always have the support of all these people who are around you, helping you do the work. That culture is different here. You don't really have that much support. So rest, take breaks, and try and recover from the day-to-day struggles of leading a church in Europe. But when we shift that conversation and then begin to focus on leadership in multicultural churches, Israel has pointed out there is a lot of adjusting that we need to do. That the church itself, now that we're in Europe, there are a lot of things that we need to unlearn and a lot of new things that we need to learn because we are in a different context. Picking up on Dr. Sande's point that, and this is quite quoted in the missiology circles, that a church that is not actively engaged in mission is not a church at all. It has lost its purpose of living, right? And so that requires that we need to keep mission at the center, but mission requires us to keep contextualizing and keep adapting. That what we did and worked in Lilongwe is not going to work in Liverpool. It's a different culture, it's a different people, different language, different worldview, different everything. And we need to begin to get to figure out how do we then adjust, how do we adapt. There is that the issue of how to lead in a multicultural church, that as Israel has put it, you can't lead like you're in Africa here. You have to learn new ways of leading. The question of titles, that's a big issue. That for Africans, it's normal life. You use your titles. That's important. It's an important part of your identity. Here in the UK, maybe in certain circumstances, but otherwise, people won't really bother about titles. And so these are all things that we need to learn. The church is only as effective as it can be if it is contextualizing itself for where God has placed it. Without the intentional adaptation and contextualization, we end up with I mean, I could use images of churches that we see around the UK today that were built and shaped for a culture that disappeared 100 years ago, and the churches are still existing. We need to move on from that. The church needs to continually discern what is it that God is doing in its neighborhood, and keep on adjusting and adapting to make sure that it's a relevant witness to where God has placed it. And so that's a call for the African church as well, that we are here, God has placed us here for a reason. He has not placed us here for just for Zimbabweans, right? We need to move on from that. I do think that I make this argument quite a lot when I talk Nigerians and Ghanaians. When we take our ministries and limit them to just fellow nationals, we limit the very thing that God has given us for the world. Right? That in the AFM, God's desire is to reach the world. And if we limit that by making it a Zimbabwean church, we end up with something like, say, for example, the Coptic Church of Egypt. That's only a church for Coptic people who speak Coptic, or the Ethiopian church, right, of people who are just a tribal church. God calls us to move beyond our tribes so that we can be part of the one new tribe that is the body of Christ, right? And so we need to keep moving in that direction. God, in studying the AFM, God is interested in the world. In placing the AFM in the UK, God is too interested in the world, not just Zimbabweans. When we focus on just Zimbabweans, we lose a great deal of what God has called us to do. I stop there.
Right. Harvey, while you're on that, you published a book, right? Where you did some research into the younger generation. Okay, this is the next point where we're going to go to, and all the panelists are going to be involved. And I'm just starting with you because I have read that book and it's really powerful. I would really encourage every African diaspora church leader to look at that. I know Sunday and Samshonga, you did some work on that, and this is where we're going to go to. So Harvey, just tell us, in that book, you have looked at a number of churches, right? The point I made earlier on was, in my view, to be honest, I know it's okay that you could have a monocultural church, but I'm thinking that it can only go so far, because as time goes on, the younger generation comes in, which is what we've been seeing in research, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about now. I'm going to get everybody to chip in, but I want Harvey, can you just tell us that phenomenal research you did, how many churches, which nationalities, and tell us what you found, what were the young people saying? And I'm going to go to somebody else after you. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it's very important. We need to think about the church, not just now, but the church for tomorrow. So let's hear from you, Harvey.
I believe you're talking about Roots and Wings.
Absolutely, that's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, so
if you still remember what you published.
Oh yeah, this is like 2 years old. So
I know.
And it's a subject that I wrestle with quite a lot. So I still up to date in that conversation. I worked with a number of churches. In the end, I collected data from 100 young Africans growing up in the UK. I was exploring how they are processing their faith, how they process their religious lives. But also in the background is another 20 years of talking to African youth leaders, African youth pastors in Germany, in the UK, in the United States. So that all informed what I put in Roots and Wings. The book itself came out of just a bit of a frustration with the situation, especially in London in 2018. In 2018, it became clear that many young Black people were killing one another in London. Almost every week, I kept the list of the names. Almost every week, you would hear of 1-2 people that have been killed, knife crime. But so there was that. Many African kids are dying in London. Of course, it's nationwide, but London was on the spotlight. But on the other hand, we were also seeing what seemed to be a very exciting time in London Christianity, especially African Christianity in London, that it was growing quite massively. We do know that as we speak today, we do know that it's official that on any given Sunday, over 60% of church attendance in London is going to be Black. Black people form only 14% of London's population. So 14% accounting for 60% of church attendance. That's quite something. So we're celebrating the fact that London Christianity is Black Christians are having a significant impact on the religious landscape of the city. But on the other hand, we're seeing many young Africans basically killing one another in London as well. One of the shockers in doing that research was a statement that I read from a police website in London saying the greatest threat for young Black people in London is fellow young Black people, right? And that made me realize we need to talk about this. We need to do something about this. From a theologian's perspective, I began to think, yes, the parents are in church almost every day of the week, right? The churches are full, packed, and thriving, but the kids are killing one another on the streets. Where is the disconnect, right? And so in that process, I sent out a questionnaire, got 100 responses back, just exploring what is it that you're doing about your faith? What is it that you want from your parents' churches? Where is the future here? And part of that is just the conviction that as we see London Christianity becoming more and more Black, as we see more and more Black churches emerge in Europe, I do think that African churches will play a key role in it. Somewhere I make a ridiculous statement that says the future of European Christianity is in Africa, basically, that Africans will play a significant role in the future of European Christianity, that these young Black kids that we're seeing today are the future of Christianity in Europe. And so we need to pay attention to them. We need what is it that they are thinking, doing about church? How do we strengthen their faith? Was the basic question. A simple answer was, for most of these young people, the churches of their parents don't really cut it. They don't like them. They don't want to attend. They attend simply because parents want them to. And once they are out of the house, go live on their own. If they still stay in the faith, they'll find a church that's more tailored towards them, right? And that's one of the big problems that we have to wrestle with. That what we are doing here as African Christians in Europe, in many cases seems very African, that even our children cannot relate with it. One of the quotations from the research was simply this young Ghanaian chap, a pastor's kid, who said, whenever I enter that church, my father's church, right? Whenever I enter that church, I feel like I'm in Accra, and therefore I feel like I don't belong. Another Nigerian church, a Redeemed Christian Church of God pastor, comes to me and says, my twin sons don't speak to me anymore because I forced them to go to church until they went to college. And after that, they don't like church. They don't even like to relate with me. The experience of forcing them to go to church caused them trauma. So we really need to figure out how do we equip, how do we shape, most of us, I think the four of us that I can see on the screen here, were discipled in high schools in Africa, right? The student Christian organizations. Those were the key places where we learned to read the Bible together. We learned to to pray together. We learn to do all these things. Our children growing up in the UK don't have access to that, right? Our understanding of youth ministry is what we did in Africa when the whole church was involved in discipleship. Here in the UK, our children don't have access to those same ways of doing discipleship. And so we need to figure out new ways how to impart the faith to our children, because they are the future of our churches, right? Without that, migrant congregations don't last for more than 2 generations. We know that from the Korean churches in America. We know that from the Hispanic churches in Canada. We know that from the Welsh churches in England. We know that from the Jamaican churches in the UK. Migrant congregations don't really last more than 2 generations. And I do hope that African Christians hearing my voice today will begin to think, what's the future looking like? Is this thing that we're doing going to be here for just the next 20 years? How can we empower and equip our young people so that this work we're doing will have legacy, that it will continue? I do emphasize the fact that I think that the future of Christianity in Europe really depends on how we disciple our kids, our African kids growing up in Europe. Mr. Blair.
Wow, that's really profound, Harvey. I did recommend your book to 2 youth leaders I know who are in monocultural churches, just to try and open their eyes on that. When we talk of church, when we talk of a business or whatever it is, we have to look at tomorrow. And I like the point that you made that monocultural immigrant churches, they don't last 2 generations. We know example of Jamaican churches in the UK, they're struggling now. You give examples from the US. It's pretty the same picture. And I thank you for bringing that out, because I really want as many ministers to hear this, because church is actually what's going to happen tomorrow, because we look ahead at what we are doing. And I'm glad you did share some of those experiences. I'm going to turn my attention to Dr. Sunday. We found some really, I would say from a research perspective, very interesting findings, but from a position of a minister, really worrying kind of stuff. I'm going to turn to Dr. Sunday just to just tell us what we found out, what you find out, because I'm moderating, particularly from the church that we researched and what the young people were saying. Just share with us their experiences and what they were saying, and then we can take it from there.
Thank you, Pastor Hartness. You know, friends, to be real, I like Dr. Harvey is so bold on his statement. The church has no future in terms of the second generation. I'm speaking from a theologian who is running on the lines, who is watching the praxis in the church. So research has it from previous churches, as Harvey has put it. But what we have found from the young people themselves, I want to take you to 2 aspects. I know they resonate here and there, but there's a work that I did with Sam Shonga on the youth, trying just to hear with them. I think one shocking issue that they came up with was we don't identify with the church, or the church does not address our issues. And that's a big issue, because to me, it goes on to our theology. You know, we have got this African theology that we are peddling in a new context that really is not serving much purpose. And maybe particularly it serves the first generation per se. But to the young people, it doesn't add value to them, because they are already changing in terms of the dynamics. And this resonates with the second study I did with Pastor Daniel Manyanga, where we're looking at identity crisis in the young people. So you begin to see that these young people, I think this also Abby has resonated. They don't identify. I think we are dealing with people who are no longer who we think they are, because our paradigms are still African, but they've been socialized into maybe hybrid. We saw a hybridized kind of identity that they have. So in terms of the theology, the churches that we have is not even preparing them to continue with our faith. Not only mentioning continuing, but Abia said we don't have areas that supports discipling and equipping the young people, because we used to rely on on Christian unions in Africa. But here, where do they learn apart from us in our mini churches? And most of the time we're not with them. The diasporic socioeconomic is challenging. So what we saw and concluded was if theologians and leaders are not investing into the next generation, which is the young people, not only investing, but contextualizing the church to belong to and involve the young people and find the space within the African diasporic worship and expressions, I tell you, then we don't really have a future. I know we are people of faith, and we declare that in the name of Jesus, under the power of the Holy Spirit, they will stand. But in reality, research is confirming that. The last one that I want to add on is, every time that, even from my professional experience as a minister, I lose people. Once they go to university, I know the chapter is closed. They're lost, they disappear. You try to follow them up. You can even send your fellow pastor to say, hey, I've got my, young man, who's coming to your city. Abby, can you take care of him? They just register a week, one to your church, and they're gone into something else. They join other churches, perhaps, which are more receptive to who they are. So we have got identity crisis. We have got the issue of meeting their needs, the contextual needs, of which I think we as leaders, we are failing to understand who is a young person, what is their identity in the UK, and are we still the same? So I really want to underline the word theology. What are we selling as leaders? What is our breaking ground? Do we still need to teach them about demons and deliverance? To what extent? Or how are we packaging what we understand? Do they see it in that light? And what really makes them tick when they come to church? As I'm closing, recently, one of the young people in our churches, they said it clearly, Pastor, it's boring. Your churches are boring. We can actually predict what's going to happen, and it's not. So you see, they're talking, but I think we are not listening, or we don't have equipment. We are not trained enough to really deal with those things. So, Pastor Samshonga, the issue of the second generation is quite huge, but I just want to stop here for others.
Yeah. Thank you very much. As I said, I mean, from a theologian, researcher perspective, it was quite interesting. A lot of things came out, and I think it's been echoed already. And a lot of them were actually saying church is boring. Some of them were saying we are made to sing African songs. I won't mention what language. Some were saying the church is being Zimbified. I try to make out what it means. It means it's too Zimbabweanized. That's what the young people were saying. And we're not talking we're talking a majority of the sample, and it is worrying. And almost every one of them is saying, as soon as I go to university, I'm going to leave this church. I'm going to find a different church that maybe I can actually engage. So why are we reiterating this point? We are reiterating this point for two reasons. The first reason is that church is actually the young people are the future of the church. And with what we have seen, the trends, what we have seen, obviously in reality, the churches who are who are specifically monocultural, they don't last 2 generations. They don't last 2 generations. So that's a reality. So we are emphasizing this so that as ministers, as people out there, we get to understand this reality. because it's really happening. We are losing younger children, I mean, the younger generation from within church denominations, because they are from a different culture. We are not all for changing the gospel. No. It's about that recognition and being able to still be very effective, teach them every single thing that the Bible stands for, but we have to really engage them. I'm going to take this moment to let Israel come in on that. Tell us your insights, your experiences, or maybe any recommendations on that.
Thank you very much, Happiness. And I think it's been fascinating listening to some of the thoughts and reflection that has been shared about second generation and young people. I will come at this from 4 perspectives. I'll come from it from an anthropological perspective, missiological perspective, ecclesiological perspective, and sociological perspective. Let me start with the first one. Anthropological, because we're talking about the idea of being human. What does it mean to be human? And I think when we begin to narrow that down to our second generation, it borders on identity, as Harvey and Dr. Sandy has mentioned. And I think there are questions pertains to what does it mean to be African and to be British. Actually, they will inverse it the other way. Many of us who are first generation or who came here, our question is always, what does it mean to be African and British? For them, it's the other way. What does it mean to be British and then African? And that question pertains to how does that impact their mission? How does that impact their worldview? How does that relate to that? And I think at the heart of that question of identity, part of it is they want to understand what it means to be African, because somehow they have heard about this thing we call the slave trade, which oftentimes many of us don't like to talk about. And they are reading it from somewhere else. And that affects their identity. So particularly for those who are African Caribbean, second, third generation, who have read a lot about slavery and colonialism and its impact on African culture and society, they are asking those probing questions. Now, the problem is this: when they go home and ask dad or mom, we probably don't talk to them about it because perhaps it's too painful or we don't want to go into it. Just to take, for example, African Caribbeans, when they came, Windrush generation, 1948 to around 1960 when it peaked. The first generation, there were slogans that says, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs. And that generation that came, they struggled through all that. And their theology within that was, let's not rock the boat too much. Let's just lay our heads down, pray, and trust God. Whereas the second generation who were born here, they were not very happy. So take, for example, someone like Les Isaac, who founded what we now know as Street Pastors or Ascension Trust. He has said several times that when he went to school, a lot of white boys would beat him, and then he would go home and tell his mom, and his mom would beat him as well to say, well, it must be your fault. And he just couldn't understand what kind of a Christianity is that would not understand this experience. And within that struggle and tension, he ended up being a Rastafarian, before he later came to Christ. And that's the experience of some of the African Caribbeans, which is why today we'll probably talk about a missing generation. Most of the time in the churches I pastor, we see those grandparents and the grandchildren. But the parents, you don't see them because they start missing link, they start missing generation in that particular sense. So they wrestle with that issue of identity. How can this thing we call Christianity be mine if it's seen as an oppressive thing that I have to keep quiet, I have to turn the other cheek? So there is that question of identity. For African second generation, and many, where we are now we have an escalating problem, which I think the pandemic has sort of masked over. The issue of gun and knife crime, that is going on with a lot of our young people. It is being said that some of the people that are involved in gangs, they go to church. And it's possible for them to say hallelujah on Sunday and carry a gun the next day. And daddy don't know, mommy don't know. And these are issues right at our doorstep. And the reason why, we have to ask the question, why are they involved in gangs? What's going on? There are socio-economic and various issues, that they are dealing with that perhaps, that they are wrestling with in that sense. And that leads me to the second issue, which is it's a missiological factor. What they see as mission is different from what we are dealing with as mission. Because of the experience of racism, many of them see racism as an essential category of mission. Whereas many of us still come with this false dichotomy of mission and racial justice. And I think that's a big problem because of the kind of Christianity that we have inherited, which is still very European. The dichotomy of sacred and secular, oh, this is mission, this is what constitutes racial justice. Whereas our young people, for them, racial justice is an issue of mission. Whereas for a lot of our pastors, racial justice is not something we even talk about in our pulpit until maybe George Floyd died and everyone is now talking about it. But these are the issues that concerns them, our young people. So if they are in a church where we don't address issues of racism, which speaks to their experience currently, then they will go to another church. They will find something else. They will find an alternative. If not in gangs, it will be in some other form of social club. And then another area of mission that they're very keen about, that again, we have not catch up yet, is the issue of climate change. A lot of our young people are passionate about the environment, but a lot of us that are Africans, we are slow to this conversation. I'm involved in a piece of work at the moment, looking at the intersection between climate justice and racial justice. And some of the people that are leading that cutting edge conversations, they are millennials, African millennials who grew up in this country. Why? Because they are very, very passionate about this. The third one, which ties into my sociological thought, is that I think if a young person, our young person, African Caribbean, they go to school, they say it's multi-ethnic. Everywhere they go, they see television is multi-ethnic. And they go to church on Sunday is monocultural. How can they experience multi-ethnic, multicultural Britain Monday to Friday and then settle for monocultural Britain on Sunday? It doesn't factor into their experience. So they critique it, they question it. And so there is a sociological factor of their environment and their friendship network, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, or physical friends that they have. And then the last one is how we do church, ecclesiological, in the sense that we don't interact. We are still in that old fashion of let's do a 40-minute sermon, preach, which is why it's not surprising that they said church is boring, because you're doing a 40-minute sermon with young adults. They are not leading any of the services. They are not leading any of the worship. There's no children's talk. How do you expect them to stay because of the way we do church? Is it possible for our sermon to be interactive, to engage some of these issues that speaks to the experience? I think we have to think about these things as we wrestle with the issue of second generation. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. What I want to do, I want to raise a question that has come through the platforms, and I want to bring it back to you, Israel, because you did touch on anthropology, right? So I want to bring it right back to you. The question is around how do we package our theology and at the same time not lose our identity? I think that's a fundamental question, because it's one thing to say we want to repackage and make everything contextual from the European perspective, but this is a real question. How do we do that? How do we do that repackaging of the theology, but also not losing our own identity? Because I believe, like, I suppose maybe the person who sent the question, that our identities are God-given. So how do you balance that equation?
Thank you very much, Hartness. And I think that question speaks to the heart of some of my research, particularly around developing African British theology. That question actually arose for me because of a personal identity question. It came about for me when I was leading what I would describe as a white majority church, 75% white and 25% African and Caribbean. And it became very clear that if I continue on that journey with this particular church to help it to become multicultural, I will have to lose my Africanness to assimilate, to help them get to become a multicultural church. And it was a question I had to ask myself, is it worth that fight to lose who you are totally so that this church can get to be where it is to be multi-ethnic? And as I thought about it, I pondered on it. I saw this is a serious identity question because it came to a time where I was beginning to lose who I was in order to fit in and to assimilate into the dominant culture. After a while, I had to leave that church, sadly, because I felt my identity and my confidence in my identity is very crucial to who I am and to how I do mission. If I totally lose that, then I lose my saltiness, I lose my light, I lose what it means to be light to the world. Because God created us in our distinctives for a particular reason. If I become English, of what use will I be to the English? And so there is that tension that we have to go on. Of oftentimes people misquote Paul saying to the Greeks, I became Greeks, to the Jew, I became Jew. The thing is this, Paul was so confident in his tripartite identity to the extent that he was able to navigate and oscillate in and out, to be able to move within different cultures. So I think for us as Africans working in a multi-ethnic Britain, we need to develop cross-cultural competencies so that our identity is firmly secure and rooted in our Africanness, but at the same time understand that we are not Africans in isolation in the British context because we are in a multicultural society. So we need to, I put it this way, we need to be intercultural translators who can oscillate between different communities to bridge the gap so that we can connect with our white British brothers and sisters, we can connect with Africans, we can connect with Latin Americans, we can connect with Asians without losing the core of who we are. Essentially, I am African, I am Nigerian. Breaking that down, I am Yoruba. I understand who I am in Christ. No one can pull a wool over my head. And it is because of that confidence that I can actually function and operate in a multicultural context because I know what I bring to the table. It is very clear, my distinctive contribution. And it is that confidence that helps me to navigate in a multicultural context. So I think it takes maturity and it takes growing and it takes understanding our purposes in Christ and not losing who we are, but at the same time going on that journey where we are flexible to be able to navigate and operate in a multicultural context such as Britain. But as I said, it takes a lot of maturing, it takes a lot of growing, and it takes a lot of working together, in that kind of respect. So what I'm advocating is don't lose your identity. Don't lose your Africanness. Keep it. Be strong in it. But at the same time, understand that you cannot operate in isolation. You are not an island. You are in a British culture, which is multicultural. And in that sense, bring your flavor to the table, because that's part of one of the things people are looking for. Not because, as I said, if I become English, of what use will I be to an English church? I might as well just be nothing in that sense. So I have to maintain that distinctive so as to be able to contribute to the table. And this is at the heart of what I was developing as African British theology, a theology that speaks to the African identity and its mission in a multicultural British society.
Wow, that's a very, very good response to that. We've got 4 minutes left. I want to give Harvey some concluding remarks and just tell us what are the opportunities for the African Diaspora Church in the UK, and the same for Dr. Sunday.
The future is bright, but it's bright not because of migration. Migration, the peak of African migration to the UK is gone. It is bright because many of us are beginning to take these issues seriously. That many of us are beginning to seek theological training, seek training in all areas, including social work, youth work, and begin to think about those disciplines in line with the work of the ministry. So we're getting better. We're having more and more conversations like this. I think people are beginning to become aware that if they don't do anything different now, they will get awed in empty churches, right? And so I do think that just to emphasize the fact that on the one hand, conversations like these are important. We need to keep this going, but also, as Israel has said, we have something unique, something that we as Africans bring to the table. And so the question becomes, how do we get to the table and how do we contribute? Right? And there are things that we need to do to get onto that conversations. About young people, out of my experience, I feel that as African pastors working in the UK, we are possibly the only people who can disciple young Africans in the UK faithfully. If we don't do it, there's nobody who's going to do it well there. They need people who can interpret their life in ways that will be helpful. That people who can interpret life in ways that make sense to their dual identities, right? And if we don't do it, nobody else can do it. They can go to the white church next door and they will enjoy the music. Maybe they'll enjoy the sermon, but they will lack something that can only be given by an African pastor, an African elder, right? And so we need to learn how to speak these dual languages. We need to begin to inhabit spaces with our young generation that we will not get it 100%, but we can journey halfway and meet them somewhere where we understand what they are going through, they understand where we're coming from, and in that sense, we give them whatever we can give them. For them, the journey is long, right? I'm reminded of Elijah and under that juniper tree, and the angel coming in with a meal and saying the journey is long. You got to eat. You got to be strong. I do think that we need to do that with our young generation. Feed them the necessary meat now, because for them the journey is long. They have 40, 50, 60 years of ministry. They need to be equipped, and we are the best people to do that equipping. Let me stop there.
Thank you. That brings us to 4 o'clock. And Dr. Sande, in a few seconds, what are your concluding remarks?
Thank you so much. I think I want to resonate with Avi and just say the problem identified is a problem half solved. I want to encourage fellow ministers that let us not lose heart. We are knowing the signs, we are seeing the signs. Let's work and be intentional about what we want to achieve. Let me finish with the Psalms 68, verse 31. I like that psalm because as I reflect theologically, it gives meaning. It says, princes shall come out of Egypt, Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God. I want to say it's our time. Africa has got a mandate. The West has done its part, bringing the gospel, but Ethiopia everywhere, Africa has got something that is very passionate, and it's our time. So let's work on these issues, and I know God will be with us. Thank you.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to spotlight all our guests, our panelists today as I conclude. This is Hardness Amishonga from ZiMMA UK. I would like to thank all of you, and I'd like to thank Dr. Harvey Kuyani, Israel Olofinjana, and Dr. Nometa Sande for joining us today. I hope you found this really helpful. It's something that at ZiMMA we thought was very relevant for us to have this discussion to help possibly or to stimulate and to provoke African diaspora ministers and the church at large. You know, it's not just for African diaspora ministers, it's for the whole church in the UK and even abroad to really think about these issues. And we've come to the end of our program. We will have more webinars coming out. Look out for our flyers, look out for advertisement. And if you Google these guys, Harvey Kuyani, Israel Olofinjana, and Nometa Sande, you'll find some literature. They have published books, particularly Israel and Harvey. They published books very recently that touch on this subject. So I would really encourage. In fact, we'll post them on the ZiMMA Facebook page, and then you can get all the links from there. Otherwise, from me and ZiMMA, have a good evening and God bless you.